But let's talk about that sharing. Like, we've seen how people interact with your work. We just talked about how people want to share their own stories. I mean, is that what Hapas are looking for? What do we want? You know, or, I mean, or what's the driving force behind that? Obviously, we want something, right? Is it a space to share the voice? Or no, it's too hard.
It's too hard. It's not. It's such a completely heterogeneous group. There's just nothing in common with each other besides, ethnicities that are random.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because it's like you're saying that, but then you got these massive groups coming in and all participating.
Yeah, but you think there's millions and millions of Hapas in the country, and the ones that are coming are the ones that are just active and involved in thinking about the identity thing. I think this is why the student groups thing disappeared, because like we started a group called Variations. Get it? We started in like '94 at UCSB, and it was like 30 students, like these Hapa students, and the club died a couple years later. And HIF at Berkeley, the club died. I mean, all these things go and they die, and these students are asking me, what can we do? I'm like, the thing is that the learning curve is so steep so quick, and you become a sophomore so quickly intellectually, that you don't want to deal with like the I've never really thought about it before question, and you don't want to deal with the I've never really been attracted to Asians before comment. You don't want to deal with the interracial dating. I mean, because you've advanced past that, but people are coming in have to go through that. And so there's this learning curve that's so steep, and so by the time they've been here for 2 years, they don't want to hear the same stories, but the people coming in have to go through that. And so there's this thing that it naturally dies. So every time that they say, what should I do? I go, you should have fun and go bowling. And I go, you just have social things and then let it happen more natural, instead of trying to put the pressure, let's talk about everything, because the knowledge is so vastly different.
So just to clarify for folks, HIF that he mentioned was the Hapa Issues Forum, a group very active in the 90s. Yeah. Well, one thing I think you're totally right about that, but one thing I would add is there's a new group now called the National Association of Multiethnic Student Organizations, and it's just an emerging group, and they're actually trying to tackle exactly what you're talking about, the way that student groups will cycle into existence and out, how to transfer that knowledge so that, when the seniors graduate, the next group has to start from square one. So there's definitely some infrastructure for that. Yeah. So, but, I mean, talking about being Hapa in the context of sort of the larger global scheme, one thing that came to mind was China. A lot of growth. Do you know Elite Models? Right, Elite Models, they recruited Giselle. They're kind of a big deal in modeling. If you look at their website for Hong Kong, there's no shortage of Hapa models, right? There's a standard of beauty there. But then on the flip side, do you remember the story about the Chinese American Idol? Right? Right, the black Chinese girl who sparked this big conversation about race in China.
Death threats.
Some of it extremely negative, definitely hate mail. Should never have been born, get out of China. So, I mean, there's context where being Hapa is good, and there's other contexts where, at least to some people, it's bad. So, I mean, what's your take on that? What's the Hapa experience to you?
Ken, you give me this like, what is God questions? I've always felt this, especially people want me to be like, what's the answer? I'm like, I'm just an artist. I always feel like I've always made art, and because I've done this thing, which I'm essentially a producer, I've set up systems to let all you guys come in and be geniuses, but I don't really have answers. I mean, I don't look at the fact that Hapas in China and Japan and Korea are, and it's not all Hapas, it's white Asian Hapas that are the ones they're looking for, and it's of a certain body type, and it's like, da-da-da-da-da. I don't necessarily look at that as a good thing, as a positive thing. I think it's very damaging in some ways, but is it a step above 20 years ago when I first went to Asia and I got off the plane in Tokyo, and the first thing I saw was a Harrison Ford ad for beer and a Mickey Rourke ad over here and a Charlie Sheen ad over here, and it's just like, what? I mean, I was seeing more like white dudes there than when I left LA. And I was like, this is really, and then, I mean, is it a step above that? Maybe, I don't know. I'm going to shut up on that one.
Well, I mean, maybe, I think it's so interesting because you show this reluctance to answer the question, but then maybe your work answers the question by itself, or at least the people who
participate.
Let's say
that, the work doesn't do that.
Yeah. There you go.
That's good, Ken, yeah.
The people that participate in the work answer the question for you, right? What does it mean to be Hapa? I mean, you have 500 answers in 45 minutes,
I can only answer for
right?
me. So.
Yeah. Well, other folks answer for themselves, and that's what's so great about your work. You give people that space to participate and to do that. So, I mean, your work is about identity. It's also connected to your personal life. You're a Hapa. You write 100% Hapa. You got tattoos. You write permanence about tattoos. You have a mixed kid, and you write mixed, right? So, what's next? Is it going to be something connected to your identity? Something totally different, like
I've been
soccer
really-
moms or like
I've been really
random
working on
something?
being able to answer that question because there's a certain pressure, and especially from professional artists, to always have a new project in the mix. And that's always a fear, like, oh, I don't have something in the hopper. But the work I'm most into doing right now is taking like iPhone photos of my son watching things, and maybe that'll never go anywhere else. I got a sabbatical next quarter, and really, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to raise my son. And that's really like, that's the coolest thing I can imagine doing right now. And yeah, when I show people the videos, they think they're really funny. Will they ever be in the Whitney Biennial? Probably not. Maybe, you know, but it's like, I am not planning it right now. I have some ideas, but I know it's not going to be another book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because, well, we were a pretty elite audience here. I probably couldn't do this. But if I ask my students, a crowd of here, of, you know, say 200 people, how many guys have bought a book in the last 6 months for pleasure? I've asked my students, there'll be one or two hands. You know, it's just not, I mean, and I love books, but it's not, I mean, I just got word from my publisher that both Permanence and Mixed are going out of print. And that's a year later for Mixed, and it's sold pretty well, but it's just like, it's not selling astronomically, so they're like, we'll take it out of print. How many copies do you want for $3 each? I'm like, 100? You know, so I just don't look at it, and you lose so much money doing it. It's really hard to have my students come in, I want to be a writer. I'm like, good. I mean, I think it's important to write, but you've got to find a different method to do it. I mean, there's only going to be a handful of Danielle Steeles, fortunately, and so forth.
On sale upstairs, holidays coming up. So why don't we do a little
Yeah.
Q&A? You
Let's
in
do the
mood?
Q&A. I'm
All right,
waiting for that.
Who's got a question?
Blue. Okay, next.
That's Nina.
Hi, Nina. That's a good question. She was asking how I got the older people I had to physically hunt them down. And people were, you know, it'd be someone's relative or someone would know somebody, and then I would go, and I'd usually do it at their home because they didn't feel comfortable coming to a big shoot. That was how I found those. Yeah, there was a mailing list on the Hapa website as well that did that. That it? We're good? Okay.
They need warm-up time.
Okay, warm up
There's
time.
one in the- yeah.
I think that the reason why people are raising their hands is because it's such a complicated subject. I have a niece, I have a nephew, married a black, an African American, and he's Korean Chinese. And so I feel a lot of what you people are talking about there, I feel very strong about it. I find it very difficult to articulate some of the feelings that I have. And I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm launching a blog. And one of the subject matters is cross-cultural concepts. And I'd love it if I could get your emails before you leave. Thank you very much.
Sure. I just make a suggestion about that is don't do it by yourself. You know, there's a lot of groups that have been active for a really long time who would love to collaborate with you, who would see you as part of the community, who would want to sort of hear what you have to say and connect. So reach out to other groups like Loving Day, which I run. You know, Kip's out here. There's a bunch of other groups in the room tonight. Swirl. And yeah. Yeah. Right here. We're here to learn too.
I was wondering how many of the people who participated in your project had even heard of or knew the term Hapa until they started, you know, being photographed. And of the folks who were photographed, how important do you think it was to even have a word like Hapa that they could use?
Everyone in Hawaii knew, obviously.
Right. I mean, we're in New York, so.
Yeah, people in Southern California knew. People in Northern California knew. After that, it gets pretty thin. You know, Wisconsin. What's this Hapa thing? I just, you know, that's you know, it's cool. You gotta figure things out. What was the second part of the question?
How important do you think it was
Oh,
for folks
yeah, how
to
important.
have a term?
It was interesting because, especially, I remember doing a shoot in Chelsea, and we're doing the shoot in someone's apartment, and people would come in, they'd be like jazzed up. They're like, oh my God, look at all the other Hapas, and like, and they're like, and it's really electric and buzzing. And after like 15 minutes, it just, because there's you realize there's not much else, you know. And your parents are what? Am I? And then you're like done, you know.